we could be anywhere.
Thank you very much and good morning. First of all, I appreciate and I would like to thank the European Covered Bonds Association for the invitation to this important forum. And secondly, I would like, of course, to welcome all of you to Barcelona, and I hope that the discussions and the panels that are going to celebrate all these days, are interesting to all of you, and you draw important conclusions on that. Let me make a few remarks in these introductory remarks. Let me make a few comments. Let me share with you some thoughts about the future of the Spanish economy and how do we expect it to perform. The Spanish economy that has increased its openness very substantially over the last years. Probably this is the main new feature of our economy, that Spain is much more open than it used to be a few years ago. Now exports are more than 33% of GDP compared to 22% 6-7 years before. And the construction, which used to be like 18% of GDP, is now in the area of 9%. So if there is something which has changed in Spain, is the level of openness over the last year that make the economy more dependent on the external world. For this, in order to frame the prospects for Spain, I think it's useful also to have some thoughts about how do we see the international economy over the next months and years. First of all, we do believe that very likely in 2015 there could be slight deceleration of the international of the world economy, and the composition of growth is going to change probably. There will be, as you might expect as well, some deceleration in emerging economies that is not going to be completely compensated by higher growth in developed economies. There are in the international economy two main factors that are going to drive the short and medium-term growth of the international economy. First of all, China, as you might know. China is an economy that it used to grow at a very strong rate. Since it has moved towards a much more developed economic program, we will see a much moderated and sustainable growth during the coming months and years, and it will be an economy more based on consumption and less based on investment and exports. But probably it's not going to be something quite dramatic. On the other side, we do expect the US to continue performing extremely well. Actually, GDP in the second quarter has been revised upwards from 2.3 to 3.7, and this has been helped by a very dynamic labor market and also the construction sector, which is performing extremely well. In Europe, I do believe that probably the surprise are going to be on the upside. I think we have done quite a lot over the last 5-6 years. I mean, very few people could believe that Europe was going to carry out such dramatic change in such a short period of time. I just remind you that in less than 3 years we have approved and implemented banking union. That is going to be, and is in fact, a crucial step forward to improve the function of the monetary union. Banking union has been especially important for countries. Interest rates much higher than countries in the core area of Europe, and this was due to the fragmentation of the market. There were banks which were very sound, but found themselves at much higher rates than those banks placed in core countries. And thanks to the banking union and thanks to the reform, in our case in Spain, now our SMEs pay more or less the same rate as those SMEs in Germany. And I think banking union has been a very good case in point about how we can improve things in Europe in the banking sector in a very short period of time. There has been many other reforms. ESM, has been a very important step forward to sort out sovereign crisis. I think we have learned a lot about all the programs that we have implemented. I think that the solution of Greece a few weeks ago also proved the positive way Europe operates. Probably the main challenge in Europe is to recover the level of investment that we had before the crisis. expectations probably are not as bright as they must be, and this could be the main cause that investment are not performing as we would wish. Although we, as you know, have introduced many reforms like the Juncker program that will try to raise more than 300 billion euros in investment over the next years. Where is Spain in this context? Spain is performing. Second quarter was 1%. This means that on an annual basis, the Spanish economy is growing at 4%. So 4% is an important growth. We are the economy in the euro area which is growing at a faster rate, and also we are among the large economies in the developed world, the one which is growing at a higher speed. Our growth is being supported by both external demand and also domestic demand, so it's quite a balanced growth. The external demand is performing extremely well. Our exports are growing at an annual rate of 6%. Imports are growing as well because our domestic demand is behaving in a quite dynamic way. Our domestic demand is supported by both consumption, supported as well by the labor market, and also low level of prices, and the injection of money from fiscal reform that we are implementing this year, but also the investment in Spain, contrary to what is happening in other countries in Europe, is performing extremely well. And both components of investment in equipment is growing at double-digit rate, and also for the first time in 2015, the construction sector is doing a good job in contributing to growth and also in creating employment. So our growth is based on both domestic demand and international demand. So we believe that from this perspective is a balanced growth. Some people says that well, the economic growth in Spain is the result of tailwinds because oil prices has dropped substantially over the last months, and the exchange rate is much more favorable now than it used to be. I mean, I recognize that tailwinds have helped the Spanish economy to grow, but the level of growth of 4%, which is 3 times the level of growth of the euro area, is not only due to tailwinds, but also to a very ambitious reform program that was implemented in 2012, 2013, 14, and now 2015. During the 4 years of the legislature of the current government, there has been a very ambitious reform program implemented. If I had to enumerate the three most important reforms that we implemented, I would say that it was the labor market reform on the one hand, that improved the efficiency of the wage bargaining system and reduced the severance payment as well, and at the same time implemented very important active labor market policies. The second big reform that we implemented was the budget stability law reform in 2012 that make it easier for the government to reduce the deficit, especially in the regions, and increase the transparency of the public accounts. And the third extremely important reform that we implemented was the reform of the financial sector. We has been one of the countries in Europe that has implemented a much deeper reform in the financial sector. I would remark 2 important reforms within the financial sector. First of all, we were one of the first countries that carried out a very in-depth due diligence of the balance sheet of the banks. We increased substantially the level of provisions in 2012. We increased the capital buffer, but very importantly, what we did as well in 2012 was a very in-depth reform of the governance of the banking system, especially of the saving banks, to increase the professionalization in the management of this part of the financial sector. So the result has been extremely good. I mean, I think Spain is a good case in point to analyze how positive a reform in the banking sector could be in the real economy. Our new credit is increasing for the last 2 years for both SMEs and also for household. Actually, SMEs loan are increasing on an average. New loans to SMEs are increasing by 14%, and new loans for households are increasing by 20% and at much lower rates that they used to be. So these reforms has not been the only reforms that we have implemented. I mean, we are at the end of the legislature. I mean, there will be elections in December. But I think it's interesting to enumerate some of the important reforms we have done during all this year. We have made a reform of the pension system that has made pensions more sustainable in the long term. We have implemented an audit reform. We have implemented as well a corporate governance reform to improve the functioning of the governance of the corporates that are listed. We have implemented a public administration reform. We have approved a law which is very important, which is called Market Unity Law, which liberalized quite a big number of sector of goods and services, which has been extremely important. We have approved a very important reform as well to reform the insolvency regime. We have centralized that issuance by the regions in the central government. We have implemented an energy reform, a fiscal reform. We have liberalized the housing and rental market. So, I mean, I can say that the level of activity in economic laws has been very intensive all this year. The result is that for the first time in many years, Spain is not only growing at 4% at an annualized basis, but very importantly, all the huge imbalances that we still have, are under correction. And I will enumerate the four of these imbalances. First of all, the external sector. Probably the external sector was one of the main drawbacks of the Spanish economy. In 2007, we need, in order to grow at a level of 3.6, to run a deficit in our current account of 10%. This year, with an economic growth of on an annual base of 4%, we are running a surplus in our current account of almost 2%. So there has been a big difference in the pattern of growth of the Spanish economy, and this has been the result of an increasing competitiveness of our economy. The second big imbalance, which is under correction, is the private sector debt. I mentioned before that credit to household, credit to small and medium-sized enterprises are growing at a double digit. But at the same time that new credit is growing very strongly, we are reducing very rapidly the private sector debt. Our private sector is deleveraging very rapidly, and we expect at the end of this year, the private sector to deleverage at more than 50%. So our private sector debt will be placed very close to the euro area average. So the private sector has made a huge improvement from this perspective. The third imbalance is the public deficit. I mean, probably this has been one of the most remarkable achievements of the current government. Our starting position was a deficit of 9% of GDP in 2012, and we had to reduce the deficit to 4.2% this year, with 2 years in a row of negative growth. I mean, I remember 2012, 2013, that were 2 very difficult years that we have negative growth of almost 3% cumulative. During these tough years, we reduced the deficit from 9 to 6.5. So this has been remarkable. One important thing is that Spain has proved that it is possible to reduce deficit and growing strongly if you do the adequate structural reforms. I mean, Spain is the country with a more rapid reduction of the structural deficit, and is now the country which is growing at a faster rate. Finally, the most important imbalance of the Spanish economy is, of course, the unemployment rate. We still have an unacceptable unemployment rate, but the reform, especially the labor market reform that we approved in 2012, has improved the function of the labor market. Now we are, our growth is a growth which is creating quite a large number of new jobs. We expect this year to create more than 600,000 jobs. We are going to be the country in the euro area with a more intensive creation of jobs. So our economy now needs less growth to start creating a job. 10 years ago, we need an economic growth of 2.5 to start creating jobs. Now we have created jobs from the first quarter. We show positive growth data. So this is quite remarkable. And at the same time, one positive factor that showed that the recovery in Spain is spreading towards a much wider group of people is that job creation is increasing in intensity in those more vulnerable groups, like younger people, people below 25 years, people older than 55 years, for example, are the population that are where our jobs are being created on a more intensive way. So, as I said, I mean the reforms in Spain not only is creating growth, but at the same time is reducing the imbalances of the economy. So to conclude, I don't want to take more time talking about the Spanish economy. I just want to conclude by saying that we still have challenges. I mean, I believe we have done the worst. The worst is behind us. We have done probably the most difficult task, and I think that the main risk of Spain is that, which could be the reversal of economic policies in the future, I think is a risk that is quite low, because there is a recognition among the Spanish population about the positive impact of the reform program that was initiated into 12. So I conclude with that. I hope you have good discussions during all the panels. And well, I'm open to any question in case you want to pose, you want to ask.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fernandez, on behalf of all the members of the ECBC. It's very important to have the Spanish government here today to give an insight view of the macroeconomic developments in this country and in Europe. May I ask you if you're ready to take any questions? The floor is open. If the audience would like to raise any questions, I don't know if there are any points that you would like to allow. So. Thank you, Bill. If you can introduce yourself and...
Yes, the housing market for the first time in 2015 is turning around. It is growing at a rate of more than, we expect the housing sector to grow at a rate probably above 5%. Prices in the housing sector are turning around as well. Does it mean that we are back to the bubble of the housing sector that we had a few years ago? I don't think so. If you compared now the level of new houses that are being built up, it is in the area of 50,000, slightly less than 50,000. We built up more than 800,000 houses in 2007. So probably the level of houses that need to be built are not 800,000, but either 50,000 houses. So probably we will go to an intermediate level of house construction. We are certainly seeing already a cleanup of the unsold houses in many areas of Spain. I mean, the real estate market is not something which is homogeneous, and probably what we are seeing is new transactions in some places that, well, I mean, the unsold houses has already been cleaned up.
We have a question.
Mr. Fernandez, I'm Christopher Garnett from Euromoney. I'd just like to ask you to expand a little bit on a point you made. You were minimizing the risk of policy reversal in 2016 post-elections. Obviously, one everyone's seen the rise of Podemos and so on. Feels a little less in the news now than it did 6 months ago, because Syriza in Greece has clearly lost momentum, and that is a positive thing from the point of view of those who wish to discourage such populist or anti-austerity movements in Europe. But I'd just like you to expand, if you would, a little bit on the basis for your optimism that policy reversal is only a tail risk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not inviting you to do a party political broadcast, but just tell us a little bit, put that into a bit more context.
I think, yes, no, I think this is a very good question, obviously, I would say that we could see two trends in Spain. I mean, we are a case that reforms we were in an extremely bad situation in 2012. In 2012, I remember I was in my previous position, was Secretary General of the Treasury, and at that time, the situation was quite dramatic. We were destroying 3.5 million jobs in 2 years. Our deficit was 9% of GDP. The private sector debt was to 30% of GDP. We were running a deficit in our current account. What else I can tell you? The situation, we were struggling to fund the treasury in the capital markets. The banking sector was not trusted by international investors. They had doubt about the quality of the balance sheet of the banks. So the situation was quite dramatic. And the government didn't lose any minute from the very beginning and approved a very ambitious and painful reform program, and implement as well a very tough fiscal policy to reduce very rapidly the deficit. I think that the positive thing is that we end up at the end of the legislature with all the impact of these reforms, bearing fruits. We are in 2015 growing at an annualized rate of 4%. We are going to create 600,000 jobs, which is quite important for a country like Spain. The consumer sentiment index is at historical highs, so this is important. Sales of cars are increasing 25% in July. The situation is completely different, and everybody recognizes that the change of this situation is thanks to the reforms. And when I tell everybody is, on the one hand, population, I don't know what's going to happen in the elections, but population recognize that the policy has been the right ones. And if you look at all the political parties, at the end of the day, the level of contestation of the reforms are not as high. Another situation would have been that we made the reforms and we enter into an election process without any positive result of the reforms. Having said that, the crisis in Spain has been very in-depth. We still have more than 5 million unemployed people, many people that had a job a few years ago and they don't have a job yet. I think the prospects are brighter now than before, but still, we have not recovered the level of income we had before the crisis. So there are many drawbacks, many pains that should be solved, and we need probably more time, more 4 years to repair them all. But I'm positive week by week before the end of the year.